Stadt von Geist und Mimes. Vilno, Jiddisch Lachvartal.
Hello everyone, honorable guests, very dear friends, welcome to Beit Vilno. We are gathered here to honor the righteous among the nations in Lithuania. In June 1941, there were 220,000 Jews in Lithuania. In May 1945, there were 8,000 survivors. One of them was my mother. The righteous among the nations in Lithuania saved some of these Jews. I'm honored to invite the ambassador of the Netherlands to Israel, Honorable Hans Dektor.
Thank you. I'm a little bit taller, so as a real Dutchman, I think I can do it like this. It's a great honor to be with you here as a community, as a very strong community, I've come to learn. And today we're here to honor Jan Zwartendijk, a Dutch diplomat, but the only Dutch diplomat who did something to save the Jews during the war. And I think it's important to stress that, because even though we're honoring those who were courageous and were the righteous amongst the nations, but there were also very few. And in the Netherlands we recognize that, and we know that for every hero there were a lot of cowards, collaborators, or people who were actually criminals. So it's important to recognize that right at the start. During the Second World War, people faced many choices and had to ask themselves, will or can I stand by and do nothing when innocent people are being persecuted? Or do I stand up and be brave enough to take a firm stance and help? Some were brave enough to take a firm stance in defense of the oppressed and, often in violation of the law, helped Jewish families to escape the Nazi persecution. One of the people who did stand up was, as I mentioned before, Jan Zwartendijk. He, often in violation of the law and with deference to pressure, helped many Jewish families in Lithuania to escape Nazi persecution. Now, after many decades, the scope of his brave actions are receiving the recognition that he rightly deserves. It all started in 1939, when Jan Zwartendijk became managing director of Philips in Lithuania. Just before the Red Army occupied Lithuania in 1940, Zwartendijk was approached by Dutch ambassador to Latvia, De Dekker, with an unusual request. He asked Zwartendijk to become the Dutch honorary consul in Kaunas, Lithuania. Zwartendijk hesitated initially, and he shared his concern that he felt he wasn't the right person for the job. After all, what did he know about providing consular assistance? Ambassador De Dekker replied, "It's nothing. You just need to extend a few passports to Dutch citizens and provide consular assistance if needed. It isn't a big deal." His last sentence didn't sound very convincing to Mr. Zwartendijk in the context of what was happening already. Being a consul in normal times would be challenging, let alone being one when the Second World War is unfolding. What he couldn't predict, that becoming a consul would enable him to save thousands of lives. Together with Sugihara, the consul for Japan, they opened a route to freedom. Zwartendijk issued thousands of visas, enabling an entry to the Dutch colony of Curaçao, and his Japanese colleague Sugihara ensured a clear path, allowing refugees to travel through Soviet Russia, transiting further to Japan, and onwards to the rest of the world. The most surprising fact of this story is that the main players that provide an escape route barely communicated with each other. It is almost like they had a mutual understanding, and I mean Zwartendijk and Sugihara, that they had a mutual understanding that they had to do everything in their powers as diplomats to save as many lives as possible. They never hid behind the rules of bureaucracy. Instead, they mastered the art of thinking creatively. Offering them the possibility of an escape route was better than doing nothing. To do nothing almost certainly would mean death for many. For 2 decades, Zwartendijk hadn't heard a word about the people who received his visas. He never stopped asking what became of the people who had stood before him in Kaunas. One of his sons later shared that his father feared none had made it out of the Soviet Union. He must have thought that most of them perished. He must have been worried that he sent them to their deaths. He carried this burden with him for the rest of his life. On top of all these worries, he was summoned to the Foreign Ministry's offices, the Dutch Foreign Ministry's offices, in 1964, where he was reprimanded after all this time. Just imagine, he was reprimanded for breaking the rules. The Dutch Foreign Ministry publicly apologized to his family only in 2018, but understands that the pain and the hurt it caused can never be reversed. It fills me with great sadness that Jan Zwartendijk passed away without knowing the faith of the people he tried to save. The most tragic part about Jan Zwartendijk's story is that only a few days after he passed away, on the 14th of September 1976, his family received a report that stated how many Jews were actually being saved because of his actions. They were shocked when they saw the numbers. 95% of the people he provided a visa survived their journey. Research shows that at least 2,178 people were saved by him and Sugihara. Many believe this number is much higher, even up to 10,000, as whole families were able to travel on the basis of one issue, a visa issued. If only he could have known this before he passed away. The scars of the Holocaust are still evident decades later. The Holocaust claimed millions of victims, but also the survivors, now mostly in their second, third, or even fourth generation, still bear the scars of the enormous suffering of their relatives and ancestors. The effect is rippled through numerous families, and wounds are still present and may never be healed. That's why it's so important for Holocaust survivors to keep telling their stories so we can learn and try to heal together. Just as important are the stories like the one of Jan Zwartendijk. In the midst of the Second World War, he showed that courage, dignity, and humanity still exist. His story teaches us that we all have the responsibility to act when injustice is happening in front of our eyes. His brave actions were later recognized, and he was posthumously honored in 1997 by Israel, or in Israel, by Yad Vashem, as a righteous amongst the nations. In June 2018, a monument in honor of Zwartendijk was unveiled in Kaunas in the presence of the King of the Netherlands, King Willem-Alexander, right next to the building he had issued the visas in. One might wonder how Jan Zwartendijk became such a brave man that risked his own life in order to save others. Jan Jr. explained that their father had a personal code. Make sure you'll never have to feel ashamed of using your family name. He honored this code in the greatest sense. This is the end of the speech. It is a great honor to be with you here, and let's give an applause to Jan Zwartendijk and Mr. Sugihara and all those who did what they had to do in spite of what the law told them, and they followed their conscience. Thank you.
Thank you, very dear Ambassador. Thank you very much. And we know how to say it now, Zwartendijk. Yes. Now I am honored to invite the Ambassador of Lithuania to Israel, Honorable Lina Antanavichine. The Embassy of Lithuania is also presenting a short film about the hero of our event. Please.
Dear Hans, thank you so much for your beautiful speech. Thank you, Mickey, for hosting us today here. Dear survivors, Mr. Burl, and others, second generation, third generation. I think this is a very special day today, and I'm so happy that we gathered here at Beit Vilno to commemorate the man who was, and I'm not afraid to say, a bit overshadowed by others, those who did fantastic job. But I think we need together put our hands and make Jan Zwartendijk known more and wider, because what he did, I mean, he saved lives. The most important thing. And there is a number. I read 2, 3, 4, 5. Number of the visas he issued. I'm sure that there are many different discussions. Is this the right number or the bigger number? But I think this is a very meaningful number because it shows, like, with every step it increases. 2, 3, 4, 5 means that every life saved brought more lives, more initiatives, more things created. And this is so important. the man we are talking about here today had many names, many nicknames. Mr. Philip Radio. I know that he was called this way among those Jews who tried to obtain visa. The Dutch Sugihara, businessman, diplomat. But I think the most important thing that he was a man of a very big heart, who was really not afraid to take steps when others were not taking steps, or hiding from it, or having some kind of explanation, or he did. And that's why thousands of people are alive and enjoy life and create for the humanity. So once again, let's applaud to those beautiful people who are helping others, saving others, but not thinking about themselves first. So.
He's a man who wanted to do a thing and to save people out more than he is obliged to.
Ik moet in hem zien als een tool van het redden van duizenden mensen.
Jan Zwartendijk was an incredible human being who, acting out of a very strong base of ethics and morality, found himself in a position in 1940 as the honorary Dutch consul in Lithuania, with a situation where he was in a position to save some 2,200 people who were facing certain death in the Holocaust.
De nazi's rukken op in Europa. In 1939 vallen Nazi-Duitsland en de Sovjet-Unie Polen binnen. Het naburige Litouwen is dan nog onafhankelijk. Duizenden Poolse Joden vluchten naar het toen nog veilige Litouwen.
It was a very peculiar time. We were in Lithuania, running away from our home in Poland to a place which was still neutral and belonged neither to Soviet Russia nor to Nazi Germany. We all hoped that from that place we will be able to get out back into the free world.
Maar de situatie verandert als in juni 1940 de Russen van de een op de andere dag ook Litouwen annexeren.
De Joodse instituten, Joodse bank, Joodse scholen, synagoges, die werden gesloten. Privézaken werden overgenomen, ook genationaliseerd zoals ze het noemden. Het werd overgenomen door de Russen. Dus het was een heel andere sfeer, een heel ander. En niemand wilde daar eigenlijk blijven, maar niet iedereen kon weg.
Now, in order to get out from Russia, you had to get some end visa. Israel was not kosher in Soviet Russia. They considered Israel part of their enemies' coalition. And to tell that we want to go to Israel would not start us. So at that time, we looked for some countries or ways or places where this will not be suspicious by the Russian communists. And one of the places was Curaçao.
Curaçao werd dus een mogelijke eindbestemming voor de Joden die de Russen en de nazi's wilden ontvluchten. De Nederlandse consul in Litouwen, Jan Zwartendijk, was daarvoor bereid de regels te overtreden. Voor Curaçao was er officieel geen visum nodig, maar wel toestemming van de gouverneur. Zwartendijk liet dit laatste opzettelijk weg en schreef in de paspoorten alleen geen visum nodig voor Curaçao. Dit document opende voor veel Joden de mogelijkheid de Sovjet-Unie te ontvluchten.
Toen het bekend werd dat de Nederlandse consul Curaçao-visa's gaf, het vuur als een vuurtje rond. En na een paar dagen stonden er duizenden mensen voor het consulaat.
Jan Zwartendijk werd volkomen verrast door deze toevloed van mensen. Nog maar 4 weken daarvoor was hij benoemd tot honorair consul in Litouwen. Hij dacht eigenlijk alleen een paar Nederlanders te moeten helpen. De oudste zoon van de Nederlandse consul was in 1940 11 jaar oud. Hij kan zich de drukte bij het consulaat nog wel herinneren.
Van het werk van mijn vader zelf herinner ik me niet zoveel meer, want mijn vader deed natuurlijk op kantoor en kwam met verhalen thuis 's avonds die ik me nog wel herinner. Dat hij altijd lange verhalen had van die Joden op zijn kantoor die daar met in grote getallen probeerden boven te komen tegelijkertijd de trap op. En dat het moeilijk was soms een beetje in het gereel te houden. Hij vertelde bijvoorbeeld dat sommige van die mensen bij hem binnenkwamen op zijn kantoor en op hun knieën vielen en hem probeerden om te kopen met goud en dergelijke. En daar was hij erg gechoqueerd van. Hij voelde zich er erg ongemakkelijk bij en had het kennelijk helemaal niet verwacht. Want voor hem was het niet speciaals. Hij deed het gewoon zonder ze vragen te stellen over iets. Hij gaf ze die visa zonder meer.
Consul Zwartendijk had toestemming van de Nederlandse ambassadeur De Dekker in Riga om de zogeheten Curaçao-visa uit te geven. Maar het uitschrijven van de valse documenten was niet zonder gevaar.
De Russen zelf waren zo onvoorspelbaar, je wist niet waar die op zouden reageren en hoe. Er was geen diplomatieke bescherming voor hem, want er was geen diplomatiek contact tussen Holland en Rusland na de revolutie. Dus hij wist niet wat de Russen zouden doen. En ze hebben het hem inderdaad moeilijk gemaakt om zelf het land uit te komen. Daarna, in september, augustus, september, we hebben zoiets van 4 tot 6 weken zitten wachten op ons eigen exit-visa van de Russen.
Het uitschrijven van de visa was een haastklus. Zwartendijk had maar 9 dagen de tijd om bijna 2200 visa uit te geven, voordat de Russen het Nederlandse consulaat begin augustus 1940 sloten.
Het moet een ontzaglijk drukke periode zijn geweest voor hem. Hij ging heel vroeg naar kantoor. Die mensen stonden er al om 5 uur 's morgens. En kwam heel laat thuis, 's avonds. Dus dat was de hele dag door. Ja. 4 dagen en dan een zondag en dan nog eens 4 dagen en dat was het. Dat is alles, al de tijd die hij had.
Jan Zwartendijk is na het sluiten van het consulaat en zijn vertrek uit Litouwen nooit erg spraakzaam geweest over het afgeven van de zogeheten Curaçao-visa. Dat ondervond ook Robert Zwartendijk, de jongste zoon van de consul.
Hij sprak er eigenlijk nooit over. En achteraf kan je dat wel een beetje verklaren, want met die waarden en die normen die hij dan had, je deed gewoon wat je moest doen. En hij vond dat hij dat moest doen. En daar maak je verder geen ophef van, daar ga je niet verhaaltjes over vertellen, daar ben je niet trots op of wat dan ook. Nee, dat doe je. Maar dat was eigenlijk kenmerkend, want alles uit zijn verleden, dat moest je met een kurkentrekker eruit halen. Want hij was eigenlijk veel meer geïnteresseerd in de andere persoon. Dat heeft hij te vertellen. En wat hij allemaal had te vertellen vond hij eigenlijk onbelangrijk.
Je moet natuurlijk realiseren dat in die hele tijd wist hij niet of er iets van was gekomen. Hij wist dat het een kleine episode was geweest waar hij dus hard had gewerkt om die visa uit te schrijven. Maar of de resultaten waren, daar wist hij niet veel van. Dus het was niet zo'n groot evenement voor hem.
in 1963 is er een verhaal geweest in een krant in Los Angeles. Een Joodse krant. En die waren op de een of andere manier dat verhaal op het spoor gekomen. En daar was een verhaal over de Angel of Curaçao en die Nederlander, die van Philips, die mensen had geholpen. Maar de naam stond daar niet in. En dat is toen opgepikt door een Nederlandse krant. En die zijn toen gaan zoeken. En die zijn toen uiteindelijk bij mijn vader terechtgekomen. Die heeft daar toen een verhaaltje van, of een interview gegeven. Maar eigenlijk wilde mijn vader alleen maar weten van, vertel nou eens hoeveel mensen zijn er nou eigenlijk uitgekomen en hoeveel mensen zijn eigenlijk gered daardoor. Want dat wist hij nooit en dat wilde hij eigenlijk zo graag weten.
Het krantenartikel in Los Angeles was voor Jan Zwartendijk het eerste bericht dat er overlevenden waren. Pas jaren later bleek dat hij veel meer levens had gered.
Dat is pas aan het licht gekomen in 1976, dus 36 jaar later.
Toen heeft u te horen gekregen hoeveel mensen uiteindelijk zijn gered door dat Curaçao-visum?
Ja. Ik heb toen eindelijk contact gemaakt met een historicus in New York, die er iets vanaf wist. En die wist dus dat het tussen 2100 en 2200 mensen waren die met behulp van het Curaçao-visum waren weggekomen. En dat heeft hij dus nog net gehoord voor hij gestorven is. Dat het er minstens 2000 waren. Kon hij bijna niet geloven. Daar was hij blij mee hoor.
Jan Zwartendijk stierf in september 1976. Na zijn dood werd pas duidelijk wat Zwartendijk voor de Joodse gemeenschap in Litouwen heeft betekend. De Amerikaans-Joodse organisatie Boys Town Jerusalem werd geïnspireerd door de daden van de Nederlandse consul en heeft zelfs een award naar hem genoemd.
The award was established in Jan Zwartendijk's name. It is called the Jan Zwartendijk Award for Humanitarian Ethics and Values. And it is going to be presented annually, perhaps, not necessarily, to individuals who demonstrate that same type of principled action, who are doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And in the model of Jan Zwartendijk, it will very likely be just an ordinary person who is doing something extraordinary.
Het was een stukje een zogenaamd waardeloos stukje papier, maar het tragische daarvan is dat zo'n waardeloos stukje papier een mensenleven betekende.
Het was gewoon iets wat bij hem langs kwam. De geschiedenis kwam bij hem langs en hij deed het gewoon.
I think he was what we call in our tradition one of the righteous of the Gentiles, of the nations.
I am pleased to invite Katya Gusarov from the Yad Vashem Department of the Righteous Among Nations, who will share with us the criteria for the recognition of righteous. Please, Katya.
So I'll just give you some, sense what is the criteria for the recognition of someone as righteous among the nations, as Jan Zwartendijk and the others. So we have actually only 4 main criteria which are crucial for the recognition, and one of the most crucial of them is the evidence from the part of the direct survivor, someone who was helped by this or that person, non-Jewish person, during the years of the Holocaust. Of course, it is also crucial that the rescue, that the help given to a Jew by a non-Jew happened during the years of persecution by the Nazis, not in any other period of time. Now, the person who is extending a helping hand to to a Jew or to a group of Jews should, according to the criteria, know that he's helping Jews. He has to be sure about that, yeah? Not the POWs of other countries, not other people that might be in the state of danger. One of the third criteria is a certain risk to a life or to the career of the helper, of the rescuer. And the last one actually is not demanding anything in return, like expecting to be paid or expecting to that a Jew who is helped or Jews who are helped will convert to another religion, to Christianity, for example. But just doing it out of, with an open heart, with, just as it was said in the documentary we just saw, doing it because it was the right thing to do. As you surely know, everyone who sits here, the Righteous Among the Nations program works since 1962, and up to this date, more than 28,000 people, non-Jewish people, were recognized as righteous among the nations. And Holland is, the Netherlands is the country with the highest number of righteous among the nations that are known to Yad Vashem, which brings me to the point to mention that, of course, what we know in the Department of Righteous Among the Nations and what we know at Yad Vashem is we should remember it's not the absolute number of rescuers or good people that were living in this or that country. It only shows the number of cases we opened and the number of material that became known to us, not the whole picture that probably will never be known. We should keep it in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, my pleasure to invite Rob Zwarteynik, son of writer Jan Zwarteynik. Rob is joining us on Zoom. We also prepared a surprise visitor for Rob. Beryl Shore remained alive with the help of Jan Zwarteynik. He is with us today. Hello, Mr. Shore. And now, please, Zoom.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for your interest in coming to listen to the story of what my father did in 1940 in Lithuania, saving a lot of lives of with refugees from Poland. I'll speak about my family first, then I will tell the story of what, and then I will say something about what happened after. So, family. My father was working for Philips in Holland. In 1938, he was sent to Lithuania as the manager of Philips division over there. My mom was Czech. Although when she was born, it was the Hungarian Empire. In 1905, you know, Czechoslovakia only existed after the First War. My brother and my sister were both born in Prague in 1927 and 1929, and I was born in Kaunas in 1939. We were in Lithuania when in 1939 the Germans entered Poland and 10,000 refugees fled the country. And the only way to flee was to Lithuania, because the other countries was Russia and was Germany. That was not interesting, of course. So 10,000 refugees came over. And on June the 15th, in 1940, Russians invaded Lithuania. And in 21st of June, the government of Lithuania requested to be annexed to Russia. And the 3rd of August, they were annexed to Russia and they became Russia. Now, my father was there as the Philipsman, as I was just telling you. And on the 14th of June, just one day before the invasion, he was invited by the then ambassador to Lithuania, the Dutch ambassador to Lithuania and the other Baltic countries, to take the position of honorary consul, because the then consul was fired because of German sympathies. My father didn't know anything about diplomatic things, but the ambassador said, well, it doesn't matter because there will not be many things to do anyway, and you are the leading businessman here in Kaunas, so please accept. My father accepted. That was June the 14th of 1940. And suddenly things started becoming interesting, at least hectic, because all the refugees who were in Lithuania at that time, they were wondering what to do because they were stuck in Lithuania, so they had to get out. They went to all kinds of embassies in order to ask if they could get a destination visa for some place, and they all got no. It is impossible to give you a destination visa. Then two refugees came to my father almost at the same time. One was called Pesla Sternheim-Levin, and she had a Dutch passport. And she said, can't you give me a visa for Curaçao? Because Curaçao is one of the Dutch colonies. And my father asked the Dutch, who was in Riga, in Latvia, how do I do that? So anyway, the Dekker said, well, he talked to Levin, to Pesla Sternheim-Levin, and explained that you don't need a visa for Curaçao. It doesn't exist. You can go to Curaçao, but you have to ask permission from the governor. Later on, we heard and we understood that the governor never gave his permission for somebody to live there. So Pesla Levin said, well, can't you take out that sentence of the permission of the governor? So the only thing which was left is there's not a visa necessary to go to Curaçao, which is a bit of a stupid thing because that's not a visa, it's nothing. But the Dekker agreed because he said, well, you have a Dutch passport and that's okay. So then the husband of Pesla came to the Dekker and said, well, can you also give me a visa for Curaçao? And he said, well, why don't you go to Jan Zwartendijk, because he's in Kaunas, you're in Kaunas, so let him do it. So my father did give that fake visa, and it looked pretty official because it was written in French that you don't need a visa for Curaçao. A big stamp on it, a big signature. It looked very official. Everybody happy. At the same time, we have Nathan Goodwin, who was a student of the Mirror Yeshiva, which where the whole Mirror Yeshiva of 250 students was over there in Kaunas at the time. And he came to see my father. He knew my father because they exchanged Dutch newspapers. Nathan Goedwit also had a Dutch passport. So my father said, well, okay, you're Dutch, so I'll give you the same thing. And also the fake, it's actually a fake destination visa. And with that fake destination visa, they could go to other countries and ask for a transit visa. But you need a destination visa in order to get the transit visa. Well, Nathan came back the next day and said, could you give me, could a couple of friends of mine also get a visa? Would you be able to do that? Polish refugees. And my father said, fine, yes, of course, I can do that. I can do that. He didn't ask, he just did it. At the end, he wrote 2,345 visa in the days between 22nd of July and the 3rd of August in 1940. Day and night, continuous. We have Zorach Warhaftig, who became minister, who was there at the time as one of the leaders of the Jewish refugees, and who convinced everyone to go and get the visa from my father, the destination visa, because he saw that was the only way to get out of the country. Difficult, and then after having been to my father, well, then okay, they have this destination visa, but how to get out of the country? They had to go through Russia all the way to Vladivostok on the other side, which was a 2-week journey, and they didn't know how that was possible. It was a risk, but actually we found out only recently that the Politburo, Stalin and Beria and Deganozov, who was the Russian representative for Lithuania, they decided that they needed money for their war efforts. They needed money for cannons. So they said, okay, we will let the Jewish refugees go through Russia, but they had to pay $400 a head. Now, how many people is that? Well, I just told you, my father wrote 2,345 visa, but with one visa, destination visa, there were whole families who traveled on that same visa. So there must have been a multiple, maybe 6,000. Sometimes people are saying that it must have been 10,000. Well, 10,000 times $400, that's quite a lot of dollars at the time. And you can buy a lot of arms for that. So that was the reason that the Russians didn't bother them going through. From Vladivostok, they took a boat to Kobe, and Kobe was Japan. And there they had the transit visa issued by the consul in Lithuania, Sugihara. Now, that was in 1940. We, our family, had to leave Lithuania as well. So we left in September 1940. And we went back to Holland. Holland was occupied by the Germans at the time. And my father never talked about this whole episode. My brother and my sister were a bit old, were 10 years and 12 years older than I am. But also they didn't know exactly what had happened. My father always said, well, you know, I did something, someone else in my position and with the possibilities I had would have done exactly the same. I know, and you know, that is not true. And being in which was occupied by the Germans, he must have had tremendous fright that the Germans would discover what he had done in Lithuania. Especially in 1941, the Russians were out and the Germans came in. So it must have been very easy to make one telephone call to Philips in Eindhoven, where my father was, and to have him arrested. Especially since in Eindhoven, where we lived in Holland, next to us was a big house full of Nazi officers. So every time he came home, he was looking at the Nazi officers, and he must have felt, oh, I hope that they don't discover what I have done. Well, time goes by. After the war, even then, nothing had happened. There were sometimes we talked about it, and my father said, "No, I didn't do anything particular, so forget it." If your father says that, then you listen and you don't ask any questions anymore. It was only when I was in my middle 30s that I started to understand more or less what had happened. Not even then the whole story. And why didn't he talk after the war about this whole episode? I think it is because, I'm sure that it is because, he didn't hear anything. He didn't hear anything from any survivor. So he must have thought that he had sent all these people to their deaths because they ended up in Siberia or somewhere in Russia. The only thing he was interested in is how many survivors were there, and he didn't hear anything. All the while, so the Germans during the war, and I'm sure that if during the war they had discovered what he had done, he would have been immediately executed, and probably the whole family with him. So, and after the war, I go on a bit later on. The story started to unravel a bit in 1963, when there was an article on a newspaper in Los Angeles, where they were looking for the Angel of Curacao, or Mr. Phillips. And yeah, okay, our name, Zwartendijk, is not a very easy name to remember, but they remembered that it had something to do with Phillips because the office of the consul was in the Phillips offices, of course. So 1963, that was the first article, and it was picked up by some journalist in Holland, and then the government said, "Hey, wait a minute, we don't know anything about this story." Because remember, it was wartime, there was little communication. The government, the Dutch government was in London at the time. They had not heard about the fact that the Dekker had appointed an honorary consul, and later on, well, nobody asked for it. So they, the government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, sent a letter to my father and said, "Well, could you please tell us what you have done?" Because he had, of course, when the Russians came, burned everything. There were no papers left. There were no files left. Nothing. So even personally, he didn't have anything when he went back to Holland. He had burned everything. So he wrote a letter to the ministry, be very careful about it. Because you never know what happens, and still he was wondering if there were any survivors, yes or no. And they said, well, they received the letter, they invited them over. So I thought, well, they're going to give me a nice cup of coffee and maybe give me a piece of cake and thank me for what I have done there. But to his surprise, he got a reprimand because he had not followed protocol. And the protocol was that you didn't need IFTA and that you had to ask the governor for his agreement. And he had not done that. He had not followed the rules. So he had done something wrong. I remember, that was in 1964, that he was very angry when he came home and he didn't want anything to do with it. I'll come back to the reprimand a bit later. So nothing happened. There were some people who came to ask for a question, some journalists and so on, but nothing really made. And in 1976, my father died at the age of 80. And the letter, which came from Jerusalem, from Rabbi Tokaya, with the answer that 95% of all the visa, the destination visa that he had issued, 2,345, had survived, 95%. But it arrived at the day of his funeral. He never knew the answer to this. It must have made him very happy. Well, then, after that, in 1976, nothing again. Small things, small attention, left and right, small memories, but nothing very major. Until during the 90s, Rabbi Ronald Gray from Boys Town, Jerusalem. I'm sure you're all familiar with Boys Town, Jerusalem. Fantastic school in Jerusalem. He caught the story and said he wanted to do something with it. And he started organizing plate dinners in New York and all over the East Coast and the US. I was working in the US at that time. So I had the privilege of attending a number of those dinners. And I remember distinctly that there were then still a number of attendants who came up to me after the talk and got from the inside pocket, they took their passport and showed it to me, and that was the visa from my father with a signature. That was quite emotional. Those things. In addition, in Boys Town, Jerusalem made a big monument in their school, in their fantastic school with fantastic grounds, beautiful school, very nice people. And Yad Vashem also then gave him the name of the Gracious in 1997, for which we were very grateful. And I hope my father watched from a cloud, and he must have been very grateful as well. Then again, nothing much happened. The ambassador of Holland, the Dutch ambassador of Holland in Lithuania, in 5 years ago, I met him there, and he's called Bert van der Linge. He had heard about the story and he said, we need a monument here in Lithuania. We need a monument for him. We must make a monument for him. So he organized a monument, beautiful monument in the main street of Kaunas, just in front of the office of my father, which was also then the office of the honorary consul. And it was opened in 2018, 4 years ago, by the king, our king, to visit together with the president of Lithuania. We were very thankful for that beautiful monument. At the same time, Jan Brokken, a famous writer, Dutch author, had heard of the story, actually from the ambassador, and he was very much interested in writing a book about my father. So he came and asked if that was okay, and he wrote the book. It was published in 2018. It's called The Just, and it is now translated in I think something like 8 different languages. It's not yet in Hebrew, but I'm informed that there are discussions going with Yad Vashem because they have a publishing department to see if they are interested in publishing it also in Hebrew. In that book, it's 500 pages. There's so much information about what happened, not only around the visa, but also to all those people who escaped, and the stories of everyone reads like a novel. It's amazing. Now, of course, my father opened the door so that they could get out, but everyone has his own story. A lot of people, a lot of the refugees ended up in Shanghai. Many went on all over the world. A lot of them went to the US. And none of them, zero, went to Curacao. And if they would have gone, they would have been refused anyway. Last thing is that for a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, there was a big monument also now in Eindhoven, which was organized by the initiative of the mayor, because he also read this book and he said, well, we need a monument in Eindhoven, which is the headquarters of Philips. And that was also a magnificent moment for us to be there and to see our father being honored. But thinking about honor, it is. I have to tell you that my father never liked to talk, never liked to be in the limelight. He felt very uncomfortable with talking about these things, the heroic things which he did. That's not according to him. He had very strong values and norms, and that led him to do what he did. And he thought that was only natural. You don't need a monument for that. And we, as his children, and my sister is still alive, and she lives in Amsterdam, quite near me. She's 95, but still going strong. And my brother, he died 8 years ago. But yeah, when we think about our father, we think about his norms and values. And the fact that he was faced with a dilemma at the time, what do I do? Do I tell these people, that the refugees, that I cannot do anything for them, like all the other consulate did? Or do I think something that I can save those lives? And he made the right choice. He made the right choice by saving all these lives and putting himself very much in danger, especially by the Germans in Holland. 5 years, he must have been walking on tiptoes, not saying anything to anybody. My father, actually, he had an egg twin brother with whom he shared everything. Even with him, he didn't share what had happened in Lithuania, because it's very easy to get rumors going, and rumors will kill you. He knew that. And it was imperative that the Germans didn't learn what he had done. So, yes, monuments, my father would have been embarrassed, and he would have been uncomfortable with the monument. But if it would lead to making people think, wait a minute, we are all faced with dilemmas in our lives. And then we should not make the easy choice too fast. Think about it. Think about your norms and value. And then if that can be achieved by the monuments and by all the attention, then I think he would have been very happy. Thank you very much for listening to me. And if you have any questions, I will be very much pleased to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zwartendijk. Now, any questions? Somebody wants to ask something? Okay, please.
First, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of my family, because your father gave a Curacao visa to my father's family in Kaunas. My name is Jonathan Schreier. I'm the deputy chief of mission of the U.S. Embassy in Israel. So it's a special honor for me to be here with you today. I had a question, which is twofold. One is you mentioned that your father destroyed all his records from his service as honorary consul. Do you know if there were records that were found later in the Netherlands or elsewhere with his list of who he gave visas to? Because we know that Consul Sugihara kept records which were available, were found later and are available for people to review. Are there records of your father's work? And the second question is, do you know, some of the speakers here before you mentioned that there was not communication between your father and Consul Sugihara. Did you hear any stories from your father about any communications he might have had with Consul Sugihara? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, it's nice of you to ask that question, because actually there were a few communications. It's very strange because my father or our family and the Sugiharas lived only about 200 yards from each other in one of the neighborhoods around Kaunas, but they never met personally. But they did have communications by telephone, because Sugihara, being Japanese, had to, he didn't use a pen, but he used a brush in order to brush in his transit visa. And that brushing takes a lot longer than writing a visa. And my father, first he did the first 1,000, I think he did with my hand, but then they made a stamp out of it, so that he was much faster than that. And Sugihara phoned him, I think, a couple of times to ask my father, please don't write so fast because I can't keep up with my brushes. So there was that communication, but that was the only communication they had. And as far as records are concerned, yes, there's the list of Sugihara, and that survived. And on most of those, they also had the destination visa of my father, because otherwise, of course, Sugihara would not have given the transit visa, although he did some of them. He wrote without the destination visa of my father. But my father also numbered all the visa that he had sent out, that he had signed. And we looked at the visa of those people, and we looked at the numbers that my father put on it, and the highest number that we were able to find was of the family of Kupinski, and that was dated on the 2nd of August, and the 3rd of August he had to close the consulate, as the consulate was then taken over by the Russians. The whole country was being Russified. Sugihara still went on for a couple of weeks, to write his his transit visas. I know from his records that on the 2nd of August, when my father had to finish after writing 2,345, he had only written 800, so he had a big backlog of still to catch up. But but apart from that, nothing, no records at all. My father must have been very much afraid that that would fall in the hands of Germans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zwartendijk.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.
We will now hear Beryl Shaw's story, please.
His Excellencies, Lady Ambassador Lithuania, Mr. Hans Doctor, Ambassador of the Netherlands, Mr. Jonathan Schreiner, Vice Ambassador of the United States, and any additional member of the diplomatic corps or consular corps whom I may have missed. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps at the very beginning, I will mention a few words of how it was that I somehow got mixed up in this whole little, very, very well-known now incident in a very, very big war. Now, I was at the time a young boy of 14. And it all started that my sister and her husband, my brother-in-law, and their little 1.5-year-old child wanted to leave the city of Krakow, which was already bombed on the very first day of the war. And my brother-in-law wanted to take his wife, my sister, and their son to a safe place in the middle of Poland, near a city called Lublin. Lublin in those days was right in the middle of Poland. Now it has shifted, as lots of things have moved since. Now, while they were saying goodbye to my parents looked at me and said, look, why should a 14-year-old stay in a city which is going to be bombed as it is close to the German border? Take him along. So they took me along and I went with them. And this is why we somehow traveled together all the way in the direction of Lublin. Before even reaching Lublin, my brother-in-law was an extraordinary individual, without any news, without any knowledge of what was really happening. He had the feeling of what was happening on the roads by seeing here and there people escaping in military cars, in diplomatic cars. He realized things weren't going well for Poland. And then he somehow realized that not far away from us, the Germans have already advanced in the first blitzkrieg of the world. He then decided, if we actually reached that place in Lublin where we had to stay, he then decided we are going to turn east towards Russia. But we don't want to get caught by the Germans. And if we get as far as the border to Russia, and the Germans go all the way up to the border of Russia, we'll cross the border into Russia. And I've pointed out to many people until before that everybody in Europe at that time thought Russia was a fantastic place. Stalin's Russia, everybody had everything, work, money, cars, luxury. The propaganda was really fantastic. Now what happened is, as we approached the Russian border, the Russians came into Poland from the east and divided Poland with the Germans, so that Poland ceased to exist as a country. And whether we liked it or not, we were in Russian territory. Now, my brother-in-law realized very soon that this is not a place where we want to stay. Now, to get out of there wasn't easy. So he thought a little bit and he decided he wants to go north, because there are still a few little countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, who were at that time independent, and they had consulates there, probably an embassy still open, and perhaps one could get a visa to go somewhere. And so we arrived to Vilnius. Now, we stayed in Vilnius relatively short time, and then went to Kaunas. For one reason, we left Krakow in Poland to go to Lublin in Poland. So we didn't take our passports along. No one had a passport. And even to get, if some embassy or consulate would be kind enough to give us a visa, they had no document on which that visa could be stamped. And so we started looking around for possibilities and found that the British Charge d'Affaires in Kaunas could issue certificates stating who you were and that you were a Polish citizen. Now, receiving a certificate like this instead of a passport brought up various doubts. And very few people in those days were familiar with the term of now I forgot that term, a passport, a document that could be used as a passport. Yeah. Pardon? It is named after the gentleman who proposed it, I think before the First World War, Nansen, a Nansen passport. So that was really a document which could be used as a passport, as we found out later in the Dutch embassy, as well as, or consulate, as well as the Japanese consulate in Kaunas. So first he got that document for everyone in the family, and we were a group of 7 people. And already at that time, a little difficulty came up. It was a family with the name Frankel. And here was a boy whose name was Shor. He didn't quite belong to that group. Who was he? Why should he travel with the Frankels? Perhaps they found him somewhere. Doesn't belong to them. So in order to be able to explain things, he took me along. And that was very, very lucky for me, because I can remember that part of the story. Now, it took several months between the visa, between obtaining that document, the Nansen passports, and the visas. Things didn't go so very quickly. And it all went by word of mouth. Someone heard something, most of the rumors were wrong, but there was a rumor that one could get a visa from the Japanese consul and first from the Dutch consul and somehow do something. So my brother-in-law went. He was told that first he had to go and get the Dutch visa, so that he had a visa to some place, and that could give the Japanese consul the chance of issuing a transit visa. Both consulates, as far as I know, were the last 2 consulates in Kaunas. All the other consulates left. And I think that there must have been not only a contact, but agreement between those two consulates that will both issue visas with the hope that perhaps it'll help people. No one was sure of that. Now, at the same time, I must also mention that we were still in Russia. Although Vilnius was given to Lithuania by the Russians, which was very nice, short time after that, the Russians decided they could take the whole thing back, and not only back, but the rest of Lithuania too. And they changed it into the Lithuanian Soviet Socialist Republic, and they were really running the country. And when the Russians ran the country at that time, I don't really know what it's like today, but I don't think it's much different. The attitude, the atmosphere was just sheer fear. Now it's difficult to somehow explain to people what fear really is. But I'll give you a little example. Perhaps that may give us some idea. And it's an example that I've seen. A family sits around a small table, having dinner of whatever they could find at that time in the various shops, and talk the way a family does. All of a sudden, you hear heavy boots coming up the staircase. Everybody stops talking. The fork on the way to the mouth stops in mid-air. Everybody is listening. And then the footfalls stop at someone else's door. Everybody continues eating and talking. This is the atmosphere, and that went on for 24 hours a day with 1,000 little variations. Now there is also another little point I would like to stress. With very few exceptions, all the foreign consulates and embassies that managed to save a large number, or considerable number of Jews, had, shall we say, one thing in common, that they were a part of a chain. Very little and very few things were done by one man of his own. And particularly in this case, there were so many little stations along the way where each and every one of them could have completely cancelled the whole effort. It started with the British charge d'affaires who issued those Nansen passports. He issued them to people who simply said, "That's me." Very many people didn't even have a piece of paper. He nevertheless issued them with those Nansen passports. Then the Dutch consul with his visa, and then the Japanese consul, Sugihara, with his. And then came something very, very serious, which was probably the biggest danger on the way. Now we had passports, we had visas, but we were in Russia, and we had to get out of there. And to get out of Russia, you needed a special permit. And that permit was given by a very nasty organization, the GPU NKVD, with its various names. The Russian secret police was in charge of it. And there were countless of people who applied, and the answer was "Niet." No explanation, no reason why not. "Niet, you are not going." That's all. Somehow, a lot of people did get those visas. Sorry, those exit permits. But to give you an example of the problems, an uncle of mine who came late to Vilno managed still to get those visas, the Dutch visa and the Japanese visa. But when he applied for an exit permit, the lady there, Tovarish, what was her name? I forget names. Anyway, the lady in charge looked at him and said, "You're not going anywhere." Opened the drawer, her drawer, threw his documents into the drawer and said, "Out." He came home completely, shattered. What could he do? My brother-in-law decided we'll try something else. The next day, he took him along to get to this Mrs. Nina was her name, by the way, funnily enough. And Tovarish Nina talked very nicely to him. Somehow he managed to get on with her when he got our visas. And she asked him, "Well, why are you back here?" He said, "Look, this is my brother, and he applied and hasn't received an answer yet." So Nina says, "Well, where are his documents?" He says, "In your desk." So she opened the desk. "Ah, yes, I forgot them." He said, "Come back tomorrow, you'll get your permit." So these were the conditions. I, by accident, I don't want to make this a too long story, I, by accident, received 2 permits to leave Russia. I left on one. The second one was slightly doctored. The name was changed, photograph was changed. And a man called Asher Wiener left, a friend of ours, left on the second permit. I mean, nothing was stable, nothing was in order, everything was totally mixed up. And now I would like to finalize with one little story about Mr. Zwartendijk. After all, we are here in his honor. When we came to his consulate, there were people outside, but not too many at the time when we came in. But the consulate itself, which wasn't very big, was filled with people. Everybody was talking at the same time. And there was a total, complete bedlam. And then the consul Zwartendijk walked up to my brother-in-law and said, "What can I do for you?" So he handed over to him 7 such passports. Zwartendijk looked at it and said, 7? I haven't got time to issue one. So finally he said to him, in the corner there was a little table. He said, "Sit down at this table." He brought along a sample of the visa, and he said, "Copy that 7 times, I'll sign it." So our Dutch visas were handwritten by Zwartendijk. That also shows the total bedlam that went on at the time. But bedlam or not, we were amongst the few very lucky ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shore. Thank you very much. The 9th Fort presented a new exhibition, and we will now see a short presentation with Vytautas Petrikėnas, the head of the historic department of the 9th Fort. The interviewer is board of our management, Yarit Glazer. Please. It will be a Zoom recording.
Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Lithuania, Your Excellency, the Ambassador of the Netherlands, ladies and gentlemen. I feel deeply honored to participate in this event. And I want to show you one presentation about our exhibition, The Diplomats of Hope. The mission of the Kaunas 9/4 Museum is to educate the public about the atrocities of the past and to raise awareness to prevent future genocides. The museum represents the Holocaust from various angles. The exhibitions tell not only about the painful losses, but also about the heroes of the time, the Jews' saviors. There are two exhibitions, one about the Lithuanians righteous among the nations, and the other about the activities of the Consul of the Netherlands, Jan Zwartendijk, and the Consul of Japan, Shinya Sugihara. 20 years ago, the first exhibition on the activities of these noble diplomats was presented to the public in the Kaunas 9/4 Museum. In 2020, a new exhibition, Diplomats of Hope, was installed in the museum. It uses modern interactive tools to present unique historical material, which introduces the diplomats' contribution to the rescue of Jews in Lithuania in 1940. Special construction divide the single space into separate circular arranged exhibition zones. The left-hand side of the stands provides information about the refugees who have entered Lithuania and the activities of Jan Zwartendijk and Shinya Sugihara in the country. This is an exclusive material presenting the unique stories of the people who received visas. In an effort to encourage the younger generation of visitors to take a more active interest in history, a new interactive game, Sit in the Diplomat's Chair, was developed and integrated into the exhibition. At the back of the exhibition hall, a piece of furniture imitating a diplomat's chair is set up with integrated special equipment. The visitor is invited to become a diplomat by being approached by visa applicants. After listening to the visitors, they have to decide whether or not to issue visas. On the right side of the exhibition, a large format map is on display, illustrating the refugees' journey from Lithuania to Kobe, Japan, and the wide destinations of those who escaped around the world. The visitors are invited to reflect on this material by looking at the unique art installation in the center of the exhibition. It is represented with a list of the names of all known recipients of life visas, which is linked to the image of authentic visa through symbolic means. The yellow threads connect each name to the life visa. This symbolizes the hope that the visas gave to people, the hope of living for safer countries. All examples of past heroes give us strength to resist new threats and to world peace and human rights. Thank you for attention, and peace to all your homes.
Thank you, Yarit. Special thanks I would like to mention to Carol Hoffman. Thank you very much. Now, Miki, your closing remarks.
This evening gave us a lot of inspiration of these noble values of these incredible people here. And we all have a great respect to those incredible human beings whose order of conscience broke the rules and saved the whole world. Let's remember them, tell their stories, and deliver it for the next generation. I want to thank everyone who took part of the organizing of this unusual evening. Thank you very much for the Lithuanian Embassy, to the whole Netherlands Embassy, and also to our guests from the Japanese embassy, and to everyone here who came. Some of them are, I think they are the first time in Beit Vilna. So it was a great pleasure to have you here. And I just wanted to note that every year we are going to Ponar to have our March of the Living. September the 23rd is the date of the liquidation of Ghetto Vilna. And around this date we are in Lithuania, in Vilna, in Kaunas, in Shventsian, Nemenchin, and other Jewish sites. So please note to get into our website, to our Facebook, to get some information about our programs for the March of the Living and other activities here in Beit Vilna. Thank you very much to everyone. And let us sing our anthem before we finish. Hatikva. Kolot balevav penima nefesh Yehudi omiya ulfate mizrach Kadima, Ein LeZion Tzofia, Od lo avda tikvateinu, hatikva bat shnot 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים. להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים. Thank you everyone and good evening. Thank you.